this has been a really exciting project. Every now and then something comes along that's just kind of a no-brainer about what's exciting to research. And this has been an obvious case of that. So what we're going to look at today is a house that you've probably walked by and seen dozens and dozens of times, but you've probably never paid any attention to. It's right here at 252 North Mason. So if you're at the food co-op and look across Mason Street, and then there's that weird old Mason Street that sort of comes in, and then there's a auto parts store there and a fire station, it's right there. Like it's sitting on that corner. And so that's the house that we'll be talking about here today. And several of us have been working to tell the story and the history of this house. Two of them are here with me, Molly Godfrey and Tiffany Cole are both here, who've been helping out with this as well. So I want to sort of jump in. I'm a historian, and so I wound up doing a lot of the deep dive into the story of this house and the folks who've lived there over the years. So the way this all came about is these two folks, Lois, who always went by Snooky Rouser, and her brother Henry, who often went by Bubs, lived in this house up until Snooky passed away in December 30 of 2022. So up until very, very recently. While they were living there, they needed care as they got older in life. And Henry passed away in 2017, Snooky in 2022. They had both lived their entire lives in this house. That's not quite true. Henry moved around a little bit. He was in the army and such, but Snooky spent her entire life in this house. Living just down the street from them, you might recognize our mayor, Dina Reed, but more specifically, her father lived one house away from them and befriended them, especially in the last 20, 25 years of their lives. And though he's adamant saying that they would never have wanted to be called this, but he was very much their caregiver by the end. He took them shopping, took them to the laundromat, picked up their meds, did all the grocery shopping and this such for them because they did age there in this house. Neither of them ever married or had children. And so when they passed away, they left him the house and asked him to preserve it, to use it to tell a story of this neighborhood. And so that's what he's done. And so in early 2023, they pulled together a bunch of us, several professors from JMU and from EMU, some interested community members, and we started to think about what to do with this house. The obvious first big exciting story is that it was a Green Book house. And the Green Book was a travel guide that was put together for African Americans starting in 1938. It's named Green, it was always Green, but it was because the guy who founded its last name was Green. He was a postman in New York City. And when Black folks would come to New York City in the 1930s and wondered where was a good place to stay, he would advise them. And so he wound up putting together a little guide for New York City on safe places to stay and places you could go easily as an African American. People thought this was great, and so he started to contact other postal carriers all across the country and eventually built this travel guide. And so started publishing it in 1938, telling folks, Black folks during the Jim Crow era, where it was safe to stay, to eat, to recreate as you traveled across the country. The Green Book was published through 1967. It really was largely slowed down by about 1964 or 5, right as desegregation started to roll in. And I think a lot of folks kind of forgot about it until the movie Green Book came out in 2018, and that sort of brought a resurgence to folks knowing about it. Some local profs over at UVA, actually students of their architectural history program, started to research the Green Book locations in Virginia, have put together a really great website on this. And so they had done some of this early work. And so this was what we looked at early on. It's also nice that all the Green Books have been scanned in and you can go flip through them digitally and see all this. So there were several Green Book house locations in Harrisonburg before 1953. You'll see Mrs. Johnson's tourist home and Frank's restaurant, both African-American owned locations there on Federal Street and East Wolf Street, pre-1953. But in 1953, when this first shows up, Ida Francis's tourist home, It's the only location in the Green Book noted for Harrisonburg, and it will remain that way through 1962. A bit of something that was clearly awkward. The first several years, they printed the address as 252 North Main. It's 252 North Mason. You kind of wonder how many people showed up 252 North Main and didn't go so well. But after it first shows up, they did get the address right by 1957. And then it shows up in every issue after that up through 1962. So that's exciting, right? That this was a Green Book house. And that was, I think, what initially drew us to the project. This was going to be a cool story that we could tell. But it turned out the story was just way cooler. One was that the house still looked exactly like it did in 1958. That's somewhere between 1958 and 1960 is the last time I think anything really got refurnished or done, with the exception of the refrigerator, which William Reed tells me they fought tooth and nail not to replace, but it didn't work anymore. The house was still heated, is still heated by an oil drip furnace that you fill up right there and it just drips and burns. That's the heat source. This is the front parlor. The dining room has this amazingly elaborate mantle that we assume Henry may have brought back from Europe when he was there. We don't know much about where it came from. The kitchen looks just like it had. Another oil burning stove in there. And so walking into this place was like walking into a Green Book house from the 1950s. And so that's what makes it really remarkable, because a lot of people are trying to preserve Green Book houses and locations, but I'm not aware of any others that are sort of pristine, that look like they did then. And so this was a 5-bedroom, is a 5-bedroom, 1-bathroom facility. Yeah, it was also just stuffed full of papers and documents and all sorts of things. You can ask Tiffany more about that later. She's been archiving these over the last several months. And it's amazing what else turned up. For example, the 1880s church records from the first Black Baptist church here in town were sitting there in the house. And so just a lot of things were there. But going back and looking at the story, we needed to do that to get it on the National Registry and the Virginia Registry. And so we went back and researched those things. I am happy to note that it is now on both of these registries. And so we've done that history. And so I want to sort of tell you the stories that we've pulled out as we're doing that, and some of the things that make this house just, really, truly remarkable. So the story begins with these two folks, Ida Mae Banks, who married Henry Francis in 1902 here in Harrisonburg. Henry owned his own shoe shop here in town. His father had owned it before him, and they bought this house in 1910. According to the census records, they owned it outright. They didn't owe money on it. They purchased the house. It's a little unclear exactly when yet, but certainly by 1910, they fully owned this house. This was a really, really nice house for 1910. This is right on Mason Street, where there's a lot of big grand houses right there. It had electricity. It had indoor plumbing, two things that a lot of houses did not have in 1910. And it's 1,800 square feet, right? 5 bedrooms, 1 bath. This was a big house. You've got to assume that they were probably expecting to have a decent sized family, to live there as business owners and members of what was then really a very thriving middle-class entrepreneurial African-American community. This was Harrisonburg's Black community was quite vibrant. There were many Black businesses along Wolf Street and Rock Street. And so this was right sort of in the heart of that. So I traced their stories. And so this is Henry's family story. He first shows up as a kid in the 1880 census. You can see him there as a 4-year-old. And his dad is Francis Albert. And when you find Francis Albert, you see that he got married in 1868 here in Harrisonburg to Angeline White. His parents were Caleb Francis and Betsy Bird. So trying to figure out who those folks were led me to my first sort of interesting discovery. First of all, Betsy Bird is living with them here in the 1880 census, so his mom's living with them. Note that they're all marked as Black, except for her. She's marked as mulatto, meaning mixed race. That was the term they used back then. The 1850 census, Caleb and Elizabeth Bird show up there in the census with clearly 4 children. But what's important about this is note that Elizabeth is also marked as mulatto and the children are marked as mulatto. Caleb's white. This is 1850. They're not marked as married. That wouldn't have been legal. But they are recorded together in the census and their children are listed there. So he's a white farmer with a black wife and their children. And so when you go home tonight, take out all your old pictures, treasure them, flip them over and write down the names of the people on the back. So there are lots of photos in this house that we're not quite sure who they are. This could be Albert Francis and his children from around 1900. We're not entirely sure, but this photo shows up twice, once in a really big format and once in a small format in the house. Or if you know who these people are, that would be really helpful. Ida's story is very similar. Here she shows up in the 1880 census, 3-year-old, but this is in Culpeper. She was born there. And her dad is Jack Banks. Notice that he's a barber. His mom's keeping house. Keeping house means that the wife isn't doing work, which is also a flex. This is a sign that my wife doesn't have to work. Keeping house you want that on the census record. He's a barber, and that's also a big deal. For African-American men in the 1880s, this is one of the most lucrative professions you can have. It also is one of the most influential professions you can have because often you're cutting white folks' hair, which means you're in direct contact with these white men. And keep in mind, you don't just see them when you cut their hair. This is the 1880s. You see them as much as every day, giving them a shave, shining their shoes. Like you don't just go to the barber every 6 weeks, right? You're there all the time. And so this is an influential position. So we know he's in Culpeper in 1880, but we know from our newspapers that by 1882, he was living in Harrisonburg, and sadly, tragedy had hit. House burned. On Saturday evening last, Jack Banks, who has been employed in the barbershop of Giles Jackson in this place for some time past, received a telegram from his home in Culpeper, Virginia, stating that his house and all its contents had just been burned. Banks is a sober, industrious colored man, and we suppose had put about all his earnings in his home, and we regret the calamity that has befallen him. His wife and children who were in the house were saved, but we presume everything else was destroyed. There was no insurance upon the building. Right, so he has his property wiped out there, but clearly he's moved to Harrisonburg and is working here, and that would actually make sense. Harrisonburg was a really growing city at that time. This was a good place to come and work. And so his family moved here after that. And he quickly got busy doing all sorts of other things. It's fun. Note that he's called Professor Jack Banks here. That's sort of a honorific that you kind of wonder where he got. Probably in some ways demeaning, honestly, but also maybe a sign of respect. But it says, right, servants for Raleigh Springs. Raleigh Springs was a great big resort at the time. And what this shows is that he was in charge of hiring folks for the summer season out in Raleigh. So if you wanted a job out there, you would come in to apply to him and he would hook you up with that job. Not surprisingly, his children, his relatives and such, and he had 8 kids. A lot of them worked out at Raleigh Springs for a number of years. We also see that he was politically active. He voted for the Democratic candidate in 1886, which is kind of a bold move. Most Black folks were voting for the Republican candidate at that time. But he was clearly playing his cards well because this is the time when, if you vote for the right side, political appointments get handed out. And this doesn't look like a big deal to us, maybe, but it certainly was. Right? He's been appointed janitor of the United States Courthouse at Harrisonburg. That's a really lucrative, solid position then for the next 4 years. Federal money coming into you. And so that's a really big deal. I love this. This starts showing up in 1891. He had been first an employee and then a partner and then the full owner of this barber shop. And once he became full owner, he started running this ad. I want to read it to you because it's just so fun. My friends, the public, you must no longer delay. If you want a good shave, to Jack Banks make your way. He'll cut your hair in the greatest of ease. As for the latest styles, no doubt he will please. And should you require a very nice and warm bath, at my friend Jack Banks, that can also be had. Now, my friend, should you the above fact deny, go to Banks Barber Shop and the truth verify. This ran for 6 months in the newspaper. He was clearly doing well. He expanded his business and he actually rented out the space behind the hotel. His barbershop was in the basement of a hotel. He rented the space out behind and ran the hitching posts and the livery services. So for people who came in with horses, he would take care of your horses as well. So he was very entrepreneurial. He had 8 children. All of them worked. I guess I can't definitively say that, but most of them worked in the service industry here in Harrisonburg, in the hotels and various positions that were all, for the time, very good jobs. And his daughter, Ida Mae Banks, this picture is from right around 1900. Pay attention here. I like this. She has this great hairpiece in the back and this wonderful pendant with a watch on it, which is really cool. I say pay attention to it because it shows up in her wedding photo too. She got married 2 years after that. And again, to Henry Francis, who was himself a business owner here in Harrisonburg, right? So these are prominent middle-class Black folks in town who come from business owning families. They're doing really well. The 1910 census shows again that they own their house outright and they've had 1 child. This is telling. You have to think that maybe they had fertility issues or something was going on because they have a 4-year-old child in 1910 after being married for 8 years, 1 child. What happens next is really sad. He gets sick and within a week is dead, gets pneumonia and passes away. And the obituary shows that he was a much loved person in town, right? Henry W. Francis, a well-known young colored man of Harrisonburg, died Saturday night of pneumonia after an illness of just 1 week. He was about 35 years of age and an industrious shoemaker. He always took a lively interest in all matters pertaining to his race. He leaves a wife and 1 daughter, 2 brothers, and 4 sisters. His funeral will take place in the First Baptist Church, of which he was a member and trustee, Tuesday afternoon, Reverend Moses officiating. Rockingham Star Lodge, Knights of Pythias will attend the funeral in a body. The family wishes to extend thanks to all the kindness during his illness and death. So all of a sudden, Ida Mae Banks has this big, lovely house that's fully paid for and a 4-year-old daughter, but is widowed. And so this is when it becomes a guest house. In 1912, she understands this business. I forgot to show you on the census records back when I was talking about her family in Culpeper. What you see in that census record of her family, you see her mom and dad listed there. You see the kids, and then you see 2 lodgers living with them, 1 black and 1 white, incidentally. So she was used to having lodgers in the house. This was a business she knew. And it makes sense. She had a 5-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. This is a way she can make some money. And so, again, we can't definitively state how this all works out, but looking at the layout of the house and from the family stories we've heard, she and her daughter, Mary, who always went by Pete. They love nicknames in the family. So Mary always went by Pete. They seem to have slept in the downstairs bedroom. There was 1 bedroom on the 1st floor. And this would make sense. They could have, monitored who went in and out, would have been there to make breakfast and stuff in the morning. And then there's 4 bedrooms upstairs and the bathrooms also upstairs. And so they would have rented those out. And you can see here in the 1920 census that they're living there, right? By this time, she's 14 years old, Pete. Her mom is 38. And it's marked as 38. She was not 38. But they are also staying with them, two lodgers. One was Columbia Brown, a 54-year-old mulatto woman who was working as a domestic service. And then also a Rufus A. Arthurs, who was a Jamaican minister of the gospel staying in the area. I've looked him up a little bit. He was quite a firebrand. He showed up and preached some hellfire there for a year or 2. And so that's where they were living permanently, but that means they would have had 2 other rooms that they were probably renting out nightly. So they were operating in both ways. What I love about this, and this photo is from probably about 1922, this is the 2 of them right on their front porch running their guest house, right? This is a Black woman-owned business here in Harrisonburg in the teens and 20s. They had a lot of folks come and stay. Remember, she's connected to the Banks family, who is connected to all the hotels in town, none of which take Black folks. And so when people show up, especially if they show up with a Black driver or a Black servant, they can't stay in the hotel, so they can come stay here. And so that's probably who were the majority of their clients from time to time. During this time, Mary also finished school. The Effinger Street School was a very good Black school here in town. She graduated from there in 1923. This is her 1922 photo that we found in the house. Stories from there. I just searched for the address through newspapers for a very long time. Here's a fun one. Fashionable Negro dupes local woman to free her son. This is about a scam artist. An African-American man dressed super dandily showed up in town and said, I know the governor. I know lots of the officials in Richmond. You have a legal problem. You need it sorted out. Come to me. I can chat with these folks and get it taken care of. He stayed there for about 2 weeks. A lot of folks showed up. This woman paid him $40, paid him to help get her son out of prison. At the end of 2 weeks, he just left. And so this is covering that story. So that's one person who's staying here. Here's a much more exciting person, George Washington Carver. Oh, wow. Came through this area. And again, this renowned scientist could not stay in any of the hotels in town. So he stays at the guest house here in 1928 while giving lectures, both Bridgewater College and the State Teachers College, which we now know as JMU. What's cool is family story says, and they date correctly, that after his stay there, he gave them these 2 vases in thanks for a pleasant stay. They do date to that era. There's no reason not to believe the story. This is one of my favorite finds in the house because it's just not something you usually see. It's like finding Instagram from the 1920s. This is Pete's photo album from the early 1920s through the early 1930s. Clearly from a Kodak Brownie camera, the little format where you got the camera, it had 100 pictures in it. You took the 100 pictures, sent the whole thing off. They developed the pictures and sent it back reloaded. And what's great is it's her comments underneath it, right? Right? No, I don't believe it. He loves me. He loves me not. Do you love me? Yes. I love this one. Bunch of young women, flappers, right? You have these great images, and I just adore these, right? Young folks out on the town, well, maybe out in the woods, with their great car. Racy, having a good time. So you really see what teen Black life was like in the 1920s and 30s, and you don't get those stories. You don't usually see that. And so this is really, the things in this house really let you tell the story of what day-to-day Black life was like here in the 20s and 30s. This person is Eddie Rouser. When Pete was 15 and he was 22, they started hanging out. Shortly after she turned 16, I'm assuming they eloped. They're both from Harrisonburg, so you'd think if they were going to get married correctly, they would have gotten married here. I looked up the laws. You can get married at 16 without parental permission in Maryland, and that is where they get married. They come back, though, and they're living at 252 North Mason with her mom, with Ida Mae. I love this photo from 1928. This is inside the Colonnade. We have a building called the Colonnade again that's named after this. The Colonnade was the Black Community Center. It was a 3-story building, had basketball courts outside. For a while, even had a mini golf course back there. It was pretty nice. There was a barber shop and a beauty parlor in there. There was a huge ballroom up on the top floor, which is where most of the civic activities for the Black community took place if they weren't at the school. I love this photo because it's clearly during Prohibition and they are clearly drinking alcohol there at the Colonnade. Interestingly, and here's where I always ask for people's help, I have yet to find a picture of the exterior of the Colonnade. I don't know what it looks like. So if any of you have that in your back pocket or something, let me know. This is the interior of it. Here is Pete in 1928. She's sassy. And so this is their life. Their guest house is a block away from the Colonnade. And so folks who come into town to play at the Colonnade would have also come there. You're probably aware of the Chitlin circuit, right? The African-American music scene and entertainment scene that went around. This would have been one of the lesser stops on that circuit, but because it's relatively adjacent to DC, Richmond and stuff, acts would definitely come through, and so would often stay at the house as well. So children did arrive quickly after the marriage. Snooki, Lois was born 10 months after they were wed, November of 24. And then Henry Francis Rouser, named for her grandfather, was born in 26. Thus, before she was 18 years old, he had 2 kids. The other person who's living at the time in the house at the time is her cousin, a guy named Earl Harris, who was Ida's nephew. He was also a barber in town. And in fact, it looks like he worked at the shop that her dad had owned. Her dad had passed away by this time, but it was at that shop. So there might have been some connection there too, certain. By 1930, it shows that Eddie Rouser's not around anymore. Don't know the whole story, but he's not there by 1930. Trying to trace him down, he made quite a splash in November of 1930. He ran his car into a telephone pole, which took out all the power for the city right at 5 o'clock when everybody was trying to go home. And the telephone pole fell across the railroad track, which stopped all the trains coming in. He wound up in the hospital for a while, and no charges were brought against him, but certainly caused a spectacle. She sues for divorce on grounds of desertion by 1934. He moves eventually to Florida, remarries. It's telling that none of the kids attended his funeral when that happened several years later. So about this time is the Great Depression, right? This is 1930, 34 when they divorce. She's a divorced mom with 2 kids. You can guess that not as many guests were coming through town. So she leaves and goes to Washington, D.C. and works as a live-in domestic there for a number of years to make money to send back home to support the kids. We know from this that both Snooki and Henry referred to Ida Mae as mom, referred to their own mother as Pete. It was certainly a very loving relationship. She was back in the community certainly by the start of World War II, by 1941. This is them, 4th of July, I think 1941 or 42, sitting on their front steps with their flags. And she's going to live there then for the rest of her life, there with the kids and her mom. So just to give you some perspective, this is the Sanborn fire maps are lovely. They're the best maps of a town. It also tells you how things are built and whether they're going to likely burn or not, which is kind of fun. This is their house. So you can see Mason Street with that funny cutoff here. The Mason Street we're used to that goes through here now. Notice there's houses because that only happens after urban renewal. This is the curving of Mason and their house is right there. To put this in perspective, all of these pink buildings are the major hotels of Harrisonburg. That's the Kavanaugh down there. Again, all white only, but right, they're just 2 blocks from the guest house. The blue building here is the Colonnade, and I've blocked off this whole area because all of this is marked as Colonnade property. I see from 1933, they built a mini golf course back here. So it was quite an active spot. Here's the Shiloh Baptist Church that they were members of, so just down the road. And the fact that the records of that church were in their house shows that they were clearly highly active. So it was quite an active spot. Here's the Shiloh Baptist Church that they were members of, so just down the road. And the fact that the records of that church were in their house shows that they were clearly highly active with that church. And yeah, it's fun to look at what all was going on at the Colonnade. Basketball teams showed up, dance contests, boxing bouts, tumblers. All sorts of different entertainment comes through. So this is them in 1942 and 46. They attended the Effinger Street School until the Lucy Sims School was completed in 1938. Snooki and Henry spent their childhood and adolescence, though, living in this house with all these folks coming through. Keep in mind, this is all before it's a green book, right? This is just normal boarding house. Here's what's wonderful. In 2002, Ruth Tolliver, do any of you know Ruth? Wonderful woman. She and her husband, Lowell, or goes by Tater, grew up here in the community. They're both in their 90s now, grew up in the Northeast neighborhood. They interviewed these two in 2002. At the time, they were like, we really don't want this to share, but they left them in the house and said that, we have these tapes now of them talking about what it was like to grow up. So I'm going to play you a little clip of this. This is Ruth interviewing them in 2002. So the first voice you're going to hear is Ruth asking them about what it's like growing up in a boarding house. And then you'll hear their voices.
She's listed in this book. Tourist home. Do you remember anything about those days?
Yes,
Okay.
because consider that still, that was during the time when we were going to school and we were just kids. And I can remember people like salesmen that would come through here and they would have maybe a colored chocolate. And the hotels and all, some of them would send the chauffeurs up here. Then Josie Atkins, she kept chauffeurs too. And we would get a lot of tourists. I can't tell you how we got the name. It might have got out of the books or something like that. But the tourists would come through and stop, and then the following year or two, they would come back and come through. And the little stay would come by and sleep.
Okay.
You see it right on almost the main highway, because the right two towns to walk through that street.
Yes, this was the hangout for the officers.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. They have the big dances here and down in Albert with some of the other big
Just
even shows.
I don't know if you could hear Snooki has a very soft voice, but she comes in and says, this was the hangout for the black orchestras. And then he says, yeah, lots of the bands would come hang out here. And the one that he names in there is this one. Don Albert and his band. They're out in New Orleans. And I did look them up. They came here and played twice in the 1930s. What's interesting is looking at this and getting stories actually from Ruth and Lowell. They told me that what would often happen is like these bands were playing at the White Country Club. And so they would have a big dance and with an all black staff. And then after the concert would end at about 9, they would clean up. And then at 10:30, the black folks would all show up and they would hold a whole party. And that would go till 1 or so. And so that was the fun way to do this. And so we know that these bands came through and would have stayed at that guest house. So after graduation in the early 40s, both kids worked here in the area. In 46, Mary actually remarried. Pete remarried to this man, Harold Yoakley. Harold was a very well-known local man here. He worked at the Arcade, which was the restaurant down below the Virginia Theater. He worked there for 50 years. And so he was a person who was very well known in town. He did serve in the Army, and then when he came back, they were married. Henry also went to the Army in the early 1950s. And then when he came back, he worked for a local groundskeeper and farmer doing work in the area and lived away for a little while in there. That's when it was a Green Book house. And so that would make sense. He wasn't around, so his bedroom would have been available to rent. During those years, then a steady stream of black travelers and tourists stayed. That's when they start being listed in the book. Here is Henry in Germany in 1953. Here's Mary and her new husband, Harold, and their dog, Tommy, I believe. What's exciting is this calendar from 1960. When we first went into the house, there was a calendar from 1962 that looked exactly the same. So, yeah, this was what their lives were like. It's always fun to find photos. We haven't done high resolution scans of things yet, but Tiffany, did you find this? Who sent this to me?
I sent it.
You
But this, depending on what you say, the story may have changed.
Okay.
May have new information. So
Okay, so I'm just zooming in because behind it, you can see that there's a sign that says something tourist, right?
Mayor Reed's dad said there was a tourist home behind.
Behind it. So it might be actually for the other tourist home.
Yes.
Well, anyway, tourist home there. Here's another really important part of this story. This house survived urban renewal. This is the R4 project, which was the major destruction that took out almost the entire or a big chunk of the African-American neighborhood. 60% of the houses were lost during this. This is the R16 project that you can see follows that little line right in front of their house on Mason Street, right? And this is designed to make the new Mason Street. And so this house really was witness to that destruction. It's right here is the house. And so this is another really important story that this house can help tell, because it really does sit right here where the whole neighborhood around it is taken out. This is an aerial photo of the house now. So you can see like across from it is, here's the post office and the go up and the Klein's there, right? The auto depot right here, fire stations right here. So all of this was cleared during urban renewal. And so, yeah, that's another piece of the story that this house is able to tell. So we're excited to look at. Now, both of them, well, really all three of them lived very public lives. The three of them being Henry and Snooky and Harold Yoakley, the husband that she remarried in 46. Harold, again, worked at the arcade. I love that in 1977, when the arcade closed, they did a big feature on it, and it really featured him as the longtime waiter there. It talks about his very long career. He started working there in 1929 and then left when it closed in 77. That's a long run. Henry worked as the assistant parts manager at Town and Country Motors here in 1958. But how most people know him is he then worked at the Mickermack grocery store for years, and a lot of people knew him there. And so most people I've talked to who remember him from the Mickermack. Yeah. Snooky worked for the Ney family for 52 years, from starting in high school all the way through retirement. And I love that they featured her in an ad in 1972. Right, I'm Snooky Rouser, in charge of the marketing room at Joseph Ney's, a service that's out of sight but important. Meet me, right? And so they did lead these very public lives in that sense, but they were very private people. They largely stuck to themselves at home. Again, stories I hear, and this is my only contact with all of this, is I have memories of Henry because when we walk down Rock Street, he had really great flowers along Rock Street and would be out tending them. I grow lots of flowers myself, so it's interesting. I've replanted a bunch of dahlias there now. I'm trying to. And so, amazingly, Ida Francis lived to be 101 years old. It stopped being a guest house in 1962. By that time, hotels were allowing in Black patrons, and they had a full house and plenty of income. They had 3 people working, all bedrooms were pretty much full. And so they stopped that in 62. She passed away in 1976. Mary, or Pete, passed away in 1984 of cancer at the age of 76. Her second husband, Harold, worked at the arcade for another year. And then after Ida May's death, and then when the arcade closed, he retired. He died in 1998 at the age of 84. Bubs passed away in 2017 after spending years in the Army, working at Mickermack and other places, and Snooky again for years at the Ney family, with the Ney family. So all in all, this family lived in that house for 122 years, which is really remarkable. So these are just pictures from the house over the era. This is 1922, standing in front of the house. This is behind the house. They built the steps up to the room so that the guests could enter through the back and not go through the main part of the house. Here are the pictures that were taken of the house. These are ominous. These were the pictures taken for urban renewal. So it was on as a potential area to be taken out too. But it was not. It was preserved. Here it is today. You can still see the same ornate stonework is still present there. So where we are today, we've established an LLC, the Ida Francis Tourist Home, and we've currently applied for a 501c3 status, nonprofit status. Turns out it's a really bad time to apply for that. Doge cut their department massively, and now, of course, it's just shut down. So we don't know when we're going to get nonprofit status. There is a board that has formed, made up of several of us a couple of us from EMU, from JMU. Dina Reed will be on the board as well. Stephanie Howard, who you may know, she is at the SIM Center. Often you'll see her there. She runs that. And so the board's coming together. What we need right now, and this is, I feel obliged to talk about this, we need 2 more board members. And it'd be nice if one of them had legal experience and I don't accounting experience. I'm feeling really out of my wheelhouse right now. The other thing we need is about $300,000. This is kind of awkward because the plan is to buy the house. We're going to turn around and have a big chunk of that money donated right back to us because William does not intend to keep that money. He's donating a bunch of it back, but we need to buy it up front, then donate it, get that donated back. Again, that gets awkward until we have nonprofit status. Right now, what I'm personally working on is figuring out how to get a decent heat system that's safe into the house for this winter, which means a little more electrical work and a portable HVAC system. But that's what we're looking at. And so we're moving this forward. The goal, we're unsure exactly what the long-term plan is, but there's several ideas. It will certainly, to keep the bottom half of the house looking exactly as it does. The upstairs bedrooms have some interesting things in them, but they aren't especially historic, and certainly nobody would want to stay there, right? 5-bedroom, 1-bath guest house is not what people are into right now. If we would try to make it be a tourist home again, right? A place that people could potentially stay, because that would be really cool if you could see how a Green Book house looked and then stay there. We'd probably remodel the upstairs rooms, keeping a lot of the artifacts, but making the beds better and probably putting a bathroom in for each room, something like that. Again, we're not sure. This is still a very new project, but that's where we are today. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Yes.
How was that house spared during that renewal period?
So that was interesting. There was a commission that just came in and did a big report on the urban renewal project. And one of the things they found in doing that is a number of well-connected and prominent Black families lived on this. The major doctor in town lived 2 houses down. And they actually petitioned the city and pushed back against urban renewal. And that's probably what kept this block from being taken out. The houses were also like, there was no way you could, well, it was true for a lot of the houses, you could not argue they were dilapidated. These absolutely weren't. These were really nice houses. And so they were preserved. It also wasn't in the way of the new Mason Street construction. And that was one of the big things of urban renewal, was to build a 4-lane Mason Street through that section.
Were they the first owners, or like, did they build the house, or did it predate them?
So one of the people on our committee is also Carol Nash, who is an archaeologist at JMU. There's some possibility that this house was actually built somewhere else entirely and moved to this location, which actually happened more often than you'd think at this time. The construction's right for 1910. So it was probably built close to that time. They're certainly the first owners at that location. Whether or not they had it built or it had been built and then they bought it is not yet clear. And I'm not sure it'll ever be clear. The county records aren't clear on that. Yeah. They're certainly the first people who have, like, if you go and make sure the mortgage is clear, right? They're the first owners. Yeah. Yes.
You talked about doing the heating. Is someone going to live there?
No, but we just want to make sure, if a house isn't heated, it gets moldy and stuff. So we want to just make sure.
And well, are there tours? Like, is there an open house and like a museum?
We have had it open a few times, not officially yet, but I know a guy. If you contact me, yeah, we can. Yeah. We've had a few folks come through. When there was the block party that happened when they closed off Mason there, we had it open that day and toured folks through. Yeah, so it's
And of course, I have to know if the vases from George Washington Carver, are they still there?
Yep, they're still sitting right where they've always sat. No, we haven't moved a lot of, well, that's not, we've moved a lot of papers. But we haven't moved a lot of stuff. Like it's still, Snooki's clothes are still in the closet.
No.
Something I do need to remedy, there's the flour is still in the flour container on the counter. I should probably get rid of that.
Crawling.
No, there was nothing in it anyway, so it's good. No, there's still cans in the cupboards. It's just sitting there. Yeah. Yeah.
When did it come into yours? Oh, you're not, when?
So Snooki passed away in December 30th of 2022. So very end. William Reed, I guess, took possession of it a month or two after that, and realized it was special and wanted it preserved. And so I can't remember when the first meeting was, but it was still cold. It was not long after that, like winter of 2023, like February, March of 23. Yeah,
Well, did she have a will?
she did, and that's why she had left the house to William. Yeah,
Oh, that's right.
yeah.
The jazz musicians, the picture with them in the bus. They all stayed at that house? I mean, at the tourist place?
Good question. I gotta
A lot
think.
of people.
There was a tourist home right next door, and there was at least one other place that we know rented rooms. Snooki actually refers to it in that, or Henry refers to it in that recording.
Mhm.
So, right, they would have probably spread out. Actually, that band's really interesting. The band leader could pass as white. He was black, but he was very, very light skinned. And often when I was looking into them a little bit, when they would tour, when he would tour on his own, he would apparently stay in white hotels or in hotels but his band couldn't pass. So, yeah. Yes.
What's up with the two chimneys?
There are at least two oil burning stoves that would have probably originally been coal burning stoves, I would assume. Yeah. I am not an architectural historian, but I like poking around houses. One of the things that's nice is in probably the early 1950s, they covered it entirely with aluminum siding, which has really worked really well. It's preserved everything. We did just put new electrical service into it, and so we had to rip away a little bit of it so we could see the wood under it's in great shape. House is really solid, very structurally sound. The roof has been replaced relatively recently, so the house is in good shape. I've been working some in the backyard, and that's been really fun, just because lots of people have commented on how gorgeous the backyard had looked. One of the things I found was 4 rose bushes that have been mowed for 2 decades.
They'll come back.
They will. So I staked them off, and this summer they were back. Those are coming back up. I also sadly encountered a lot of poison ivy. That was an uncomfortable week. Yeah. This tree is gorgeous, sadly very old, and has been topped many, many times, and I hope lasts for at least a while yet. The stone wall is still nicely vertical, but it's missing 2 or 3 stones. That's on my to-do list. But yeah, the house is really lovely.
Part-time historian, part-time handyman.
So it's easier in the summer when I'm not teaching. Yes. Yes.
Back when the band or orchestra stayed, would, if there were a lot of people, would local neighbors have taken in some of them to spend the night? Was there that kind of relationship with people in the area?
I don't know. We kind of suspect there would have been, but I don't know. Were any of you here for Jean-Luc's presentation last Thursday?
Yeah.
I worked with him on that project as well. That was a much darker story. It happened in 1910. But what's interesting from that story in 1910, so that's 1910, right? The year this house was built. I know then that when there's a big 4th of July celebration and lots of Black folks come to town, there's no place to eat. We know from the court documents that, yeah, a number of people opened houses for people to stay in then. And the Baptist church there turned into a restaurant. It's converted and that's where everybody came to eat during the day. You could drink, interestingly, at the Water Street bars, which were the shady bars, would serve both black and white folks.
I remember.
And you remember Harry from Ackerman? Yeah. Yeah.
Talk to me more about the 300,000 housing.
So we've had the house appraised. The house is worth 275,000. The plan is to buy the house for 275,000 and then turn around and get about 125,000 of that donated right back to us. That offsets his tax burden. That's the plan. And so that leaves about 180K that we're actually then borrowing. We would have 30,000 of that left after the sale price. The big things up front are everything in there is just ungrounded outlets. And so it's a little, I don't want to start plugging in space heaters and such. So get that secured. You can see there's some things sagging. There's some work that needs to be done. What's super duper frustrating is that we don't have our nonprofit status, which means we can't apply for a whole lot of grants that in the small amount of research we've done, there's been overwhelming positivity about this project. I see Karen has come in. The Deyerle Newman House was a project it's ongoing. Some of the state funding sources that were used for that are sources we'll also pursue. That, as you know, federal funding is difficult at the moment, but state funding some sources are there. We've also had a number of kind folks express definite interest in contributing to this project. But again, it's nicer when it has nonprofit status so you can get a tax write-off. So we're waiting a bit on that. If this gets prolonged, we've actually worked with we've been chatting with a few local organizations that there's a pass-through process that you can use. Money can be donated to one nonprofit to go to a different place temporarily, and so that could be an option. So there might be some. We're hoping it doesn't go that long, but there would be some potential.
GoFundMe.
Yeah, GoFundMe.
Fun, a lawn party,
A lawn party would be a great idea.
It's to raise money that way. That's true.
This is why we hold these events. That's great. Yeah. Boy, that's a whole other presentation. It's a big space. So basically this had been a neighborhood and a business district. You can see this is taken later after they've now constructed the new Mason Street. That wasn't there. This was Mason Street. And so, yeah, Roses gets constructed here. This was the Safeway back when there was a Safeway, if you remember that. So the colonnade's now built here, right? That's right. The original colonnade would have been right here. This took out the Jewish synagogue. It took out an African-American church. It took out a whole bunch of businesses. Only one of the businesses came back, which is Klein's. Lots of housing. Well, not enough housing projects were built. People were not compensated fairly. A lot of folks did leave. This is a story that's told in a number of different places. There's a connections project. There's some of this. Go ahead. Yeah.
If you go on the city's website and go to community connectors, you'll find all that information.
Thank you.
And one of the really fascinating things is because it was federal money, one of the processes is they needed to take pictures of the front and the back of every single property that they were going to remove. And so you can look at what the neighborhoods look like. You can see every single property and what it looked like. Yeah.
Oh, did you tell us what year that happened? Yeah.
R4 was 61? And the second was 62? Is that right?
So in the late fifties through the early sixties.
Through the early 60s. Right, 57 is when they did their first proposals and they had all the fancy, they were showing how great this would be. And this happened in cities across the country. Like this was a big movement at the time. Some of the real trauma from this is they burned a number of the houses, right? And so people talk about, remembering watching their house be burned. Yeah. And this was 60% of the African-American households were destroyed.
So who were the powers that be that made that decision?
There's,
Oh, white guys.
they were white guys. But again, like this was, again, that community connector site, they brought in some outside historians who have done a number of projects looking at urban renewal. And they did a really wonderful report on this. And so that city website has all that information and a lot of that story. It's something the city is very aware of. That's why that community connectors project is going on, is to try to do some sort of repair over all of that.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I know somebody in this room does. There's a building, a museum, a Tubman House off of Ford Road and either Lucy Drive or Neff Avenue.
There's a Tubman House?
And it's not open, or what is it?
So that was Stan Macklin's project, right? And Stan has passed away. I was in it once. There's no connection to Harriet Tubman here in town. It was more of a general museum about African-American history. It's my understanding. If you want to get good local Black history, the Northeast Neighborhood Association that Karen directs is a great place to go. And the Deyerle Newman House, which is one of the historic houses right next to one of the historic churches, is part of that. The Shenandoah Valley Black Heritage Project is also up above the African American Cemetery, sitting up there. There's a nice resource center up there. So there's things in the area. And then Molly and folks at JMU did a really wonderful project on the Sims School and amazing images there. So if you go to the Sims Center now and walk through it, it has really great displays and photos. So there's good places that you can access the Northeast Neighborhood's history, but it's getting better. Yes.
Any pictures of the barber shop, and where was the barber shop and what happened to the barber?
There are some pictures of some Black barber shops.
You know where it was back in the day?
So his barber shop was below the one of the smaller, the Spalding Hotel. I think that's it. Starts with an S. It was not the Kavanaugh Hotel. There were 4 hotels on that street, and it was below one of them. That was where his shop was. Oh yeah, these are all white hotels. Yeah.
Where is that now?
So if you,
There is one Black barber shop on Community Street.
yeah, it's still there.
That's the It used to be George's barber shop, George Blakey. That's still there.
Mm-hmm.
That could be the next thing, barber shop.
Well, I think other folks have looked at, Elon Rhodes, who was the first African-American man on the city council, he was a barber here in town. Again, doing that pink barber case from 1910, one of the men who testifies in that was a Black barber in town who owned 3 properties on Main Street, so he was doing well. So there's a long history of prominent Black barbers here in town. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a website for the house that you can,
No, we do not.
you can have like a donate here?
We would, there will be, again, once we have the status to accept donations. Yeah. Yeah.
It was a thriving Black business community. And then what caused the dissertation?
So we're now getting into things that I know Less about? So I worked on another project with Molly on one of the first Black principals in town, who also wrote a novel, which is quite an exciting read, and we've just published. So if you want to read Miserable Revenge. While researching for that, because I did some of the background history on George Newman, what's really interesting is at the time of the Civil War, the Black population here was under 20%, like 17%. A much higher free Black population than most places in Virginia. But what's fascinating is looking at the 1870 and then the 1880 census. By the 1880 census, Harrisonburg's almost 40% Black. And the only thing that really makes sense for that is that the school got started very quickly and very early and was very good. And so I think a lot of folks started moving to the area. And because there had been a long tradition of Black business owners and Black entrepreneurship, I think this was a really thriving Black community. There was briefly a Black newspaper here in town. 1880, 81, the Virginia Pilot was here. It then moved back to DC, or moved to DC. So in some ways, there's a couple different narratives I think you could put together for this. One is sort of victim of success. The kids grow up here, go to a good school, get a solid education, but Jim Crow, Virginia, there's not jobs for them. And so if you are educated and aspiring, you're going to head to DC or to Baltimore for jobs. And so you certainly see some movement out for that reason. Urban renewal hit at the same time as desegregation. Desegregation is certainly a good thing, but the way it was done here is they just mothballed the Black school, which was the center of the neighborhood, sent all the kids to the white school. And so that really knocks the center out between urban renewal and taking away the school. It hurts the community. And so there's a lot of folks who move away during those years.
And you track the percentage, you said
It's in 1880, and then it starts to drop slowly, and then it drops pretty markedly by the 50s, 60s. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, at the school, Effinger, is it still standing?
It is not.
No?
No,
Where was it located?
Effinger Street School was on Effinger Street, which part of it is, I think where it was standing was not, Broad Street Church is still there. And in the photos of Broad Street Church, I'm trying to think, you can see it just down Effinger from that.
Somewhere like where Roses is, or that.
It's, yeah, just right in that area where that fire station and Roses would have been right around there. The electric, so it closed in 1938 because through the Works Projects Administration, they built a new Black high school, a Black school, the Sim School, and that opened in 38. And the Effinger Street School was then mothballed. The electric company used it for a while and stored stuff there. I think it was already torn down even before I don't think it was even standing at the time of urban renewal. I don't think so. So I would have to go back and look. It's not in the photo. It's not in the photos. That's true. So I think it was down probably by the 40s. It probably came down. But we have plenty of pictures of it. It was, yeah, initially constructed, and then they built a wing on it. It was for the time a really great school, especially in comparison to options for Black folks other places.
And it was a high school, or?
It was. It went, well, high school in general in Virginia only went through 11th grade. It didn't go all the way to 12th. So if you wanted to go to college, you needed to go somewhere else for 12th grade and then on to college. They didn't make it easy.
Maybe 9 or little, or maybe junior high.
Yeah, I mean, it started with kindergarten. Lucy Sims, who the school is named after, was the kindergartner teacher there for 3 generations of folks. And she was one of the reasons the school system was, she was in the same class at Hampton Institute with Booker T. Washington. She was a very well-educated woman who came back and taught here. And then George Newman, who we've been talking about, though he never got higher education, he was a very well-educated man, self-educated, and he
got some education.
We just don't know how much, right? Yeah. Did not go to university that we were aware of. And he couldn't have gotten much because he was already a principal of a school by 1874. By 20?
Yeah.